Hi, Garish. Welcome.
Welcome, Chuck. Thank you.
So before we start, I wonder if you could tell people a little bit about Technicolor, because not everybody knows your company, even though it's actually well known.
Everybody knows Technicolor by Color by Technicolor, a 100-year-old company that does movie production and special creative effects for all the Oscar-winning movies like Life of Pi or Jungle Book or Lion King. But Technicolor has a big portfolio and presence in connected devices and connected homes. We have a rich history from the days of RCA to Thomson Consumer Electronics and Scientific Atlanta, all melded into Technicolor's connected home. The primary thing we do in that business is to design, develop, and manufacture connected devices that we sell to operators like Comcast and Spectrum and similar such companies all around the world.
So we're talking about connected home here. How does that fit?
Connected home is where we are talking about different devices, two broad classes of devices we do for connected home. We have over 100 designs and 100 products in our portfolio that we design for different operators for purposes of watching video and streaming video. And the second class of devices is in streaming data and wirelessly through either a fiber input into the home or a cable input or an LTE input into the home, and different ways of connecting the devices once the data is inside the home.
So are more people getting aware of this?
Technicolor is a brand that operates behind the scenes. When we are shipping devices to companies, we are one of those silent brands. It's typically powered by Technicolor. When you look at devices in over 100 million homes around the world, that you would have a Technicolor device that's running at some point of time or the other at any given time. So this silent way of connecting different devices, enabling connectivity inside the home, is what we've been quietly doing over the last several decades.
So is this something really major that nobody knows about?
In a sense, it is to create the brand awareness. For example, this typically happens with many consumer devices or consumer technologies when you have a silicon provider or a technology provider that's embedded inside a device. The device itself is not necessarily, the component itself is not necessarily the primary connectivity factor. But in the community, in the segmentation that we work with, such as operators like Telecom Italia with Vodafone or Deutsche Telekom or Telstra, and such companies around the world, Technicolor is a very well-known brand and the market leader. In fact, we are the #1 in the market in this industry today.
You mentioned a lot of those are big brands you just mentioned there. Can you talk a little bit about the ecosystem of the connected home?
The connected home ecosystem has very different solutions. If we talk about video solutions, it's bringing together software and software services, gaming inside the home to stream video that's either linear video or recorded video or video on demand. In the case of a broadband device, the connected home ecosystem has got various components. One is how do you get the data into your premises? One is through a cable that's been laid out, very common in North America and in Latin America, and as well as in Europe. Fiber, that's becoming very popular in all parts of the world. Wirelessly, LTE or 5G, that's gaining some traction in the last few years. And finally, once the data is inside the home, how do you ensure that this data gets transmitted to different devices? How do you connect the different devices inside the home? It's wirelessly connected. It could be connected through IoT protocols, through Zigbee, through a light bulb, or a Z-Wave such as a lock, or through different technologies that offer Bluetooth in terms of connectivity. So connected home ecosystem in the broadband brings in various factors of hardware and software for connectivity that connect, the collect, and the compute, connecting to the cloud and in order to create a service for the different operators inside the home.
That sounds quite complex and complicated in terms of once you get into the home.
That is true, and that's where a company like Technicolor, where we have the expertise, once the data is inside the home, we bring the hardware and the software solution in order to offer a seamless connectivity of the different devices that are there in all parts of the world.
You mentioned 5G. What do you see as the impact of 5G on this going down the road?
5G is going to play an important role. Today, it's still cost prohibitive. There is always economics that come into play in terms of, for operators, do I leverage my existing infrastructure or do I invest in the new infrastructure of 5G? And in some cases, for purposes of speed, for purposes of remote connectivity, for purposes of data transmission, different reasonings are there for some of the operators to move into 5G. So we are going to see a role that 5G is going to play in the market, alongside the traditional connectivities of fiber and cable and copper and the different infrastructure technologies. But guess what? Once the data is inside the home, these are all different mechanisms to get data inside the home. The proliferation starts to happen inside the home or inside an enterprise. There are numerous devices. In our own cases, we would see we have multiplied the number of devices that we are using in our homes, or office spaces, or any enterprise. How do you connect those different devices seamlessly? How do you offer value-added services through software? How do you provide a mobile connectivity? And how do you collect all this data and send it to the cloud? That's where the transparency needs to come in. It should be completely transparent to the consumer or the enterprise, whereas the magic happens behind the scenes.
So is that what your company is involved in, the magic behind the scenes?
The magic behind the scenes, and it goes back to your question of why Technicolor is not the primary brand, because we are mostly in the B2B segment, we are not in the retail segment, and through operators we create and perform those magic.
So what does the scale of this look like nationwide and worldwide?
We ship somewhere between 35 and 40 million such devices on an annual basis, and we've been doing this for many years. A rough estimate is at any given time there is 100 million homes where it's running some device of ours or the other in different parts of the world, and we truly bring in that understanding of integration of hardware and software to these connected devices, manufacturing these devices at scale, shipping these devices at volume, and then ensuring that they're robust and they are deployed so that the customers are not calling the operators for fixing something or the other.
So Technicolor has been around for a long time. Has your business model changed at all as the new technologies come, or has it stayed pretty stable?
We have moved on the video side. We have been pioneers in the satellite dish technology, the early days of RCA and DirecTV, and we were early pioneers in the satellite technology. We were also pioneers in the DVB-T transmission that became very popular, the terrestrial transmission and the cable transmission that became very popular in Europe in the 90s and early 2000s. As we have evolved, our technologies have evolved and kept up, and we are the market leaders today in over-the-top Android TV set-top boxes and the largest deployers of such set-top boxes in the home. And we've also evolved on the broadband side from different technologies, from cable to copper to fiber and LTE and 5G. So we have covered the broad range of spectrums. What we are doing at the moment is to take this experience, this expertise, in terms of bringing this to other verticals outside of the home and beyond the home. And we are looking at opportunities with our expertise to talk about where we could create such partnerships with different players in order to create that same experiences beyond the home.
What would be an example of that?
Examples would be, different verticals could be building management, energy management, industrial and enterprise applications. And in all these cases, we see a common thread that connects us based on our ability to create this type of a device this type of connectivity, this type of seamless collection of data. And then at the end of the day, the consumers are interested in the services that different enterprise can offer to them.
It sounds like you're becoming an IoT connectivity company. Is that accurate?
This is a very good way to think about it. We are moving from our core technologies, leveraging our core technologies, and expanding rather than turning ourselves into. We're already a technology company in the connectivity space. We are trying to connect beyond the homes. We're trying to connect buildings. We're trying to connect enterprises. We're trying to connect closed spaces, and that's what we're transforming into.
So this evolution to enterprises, are all your partners going that same direction?
The partners, we have different sets of partners for different applications. The partners that we have for the home environment, some of them are the same as the partners that we have for the other environments that we talked about. In some cases, we have to have new set of partners, new sets of value propositions, new mechanisms of deliverance of our value to our consumers and enterprises.
So do enterprise companies, you're obviously well known in the home market from a B2B standpoint, do enterprise companies know about you yet in terms of these new capabilities?
The enterprise companies have started to know about our capabilities, and it's always easy when you ask a question, what is your home service? And we could quickly relate it to that. Everybody knows what they're paying their monthly bills to. And then we would say, hey, this is a company that we work with, and the recognition, the brand recognition, and the value and the product recognition becomes almost instantaneous for us. And in other cases, other cases, it takes a while to communicate, as some of these enterprise companies are analog companies, industrial companies that are going through a digital transformation. And from that perspective, it becomes a bit of an educational exercise as well.
What does that look like, an analog company going through digital transformation? That sounds challenging.
Analog companies have tremendous potential and tremendous aspirations. And the challenge is, how do they bridge the gap? And each one of them, given their size and scale of how they've done their business over the last 20, 30, 40, or even 100 years in some cases, how do they stay true to their core competencies of the industrial products and goods, but what is their motivation that will take them from an analog and industrial company to a digital company? This is a very defining moment for such companies, and that's a soul-searching event that each one of these companies have to go through. It could be based on improving customer intimacy. It could be based on reducing their operational expenses. Or three, it could be based on creating new revenue models and monetization models. Each one of the companies has to determine for itself what is the motivating factor and what is the reason why they are going through this transformation. Once that clarity is available, then the solutions and the architecture, in order to achieve them, the technology can catch up with their vision and aspirations. And the companies like Technicolor could help them achieve those visions and aspirations.
So how does a company go about this new awareness? Is it a CEO one day wakes up and says, our competitors are beating us? Or are they looking ahead saying, we need to basically change because the world is changing?
But both the answers are true in many cases. From what I've seen, I've talked to many C-level executives in different companies. And in some cases, they are trying to do this because they don't want to be left behind. In other cases, they have a core conviction and a belief that the industry has to transform, and if they don't transform, somebody else would come and disrupt them. And these are conversations different C-level executives go through, the CEO in particular, and that sets the stage for such a transformation to happen.
So how difficult is that? That sounds pretty challenging.
It's not a straightforward transformation, especially if the vector is going in a certain direction. When you're successful over the last 30, 40, 50 years doing very similar things, it becomes a very difficult proposition to make sure that this transformation happens. And this is where the conviction of the senior executives, the senior sponsors in an organization comes into play, where they try to emphasize that it's digital first analog second. And it takes a lot of conviction and a lot of emphasis in terms of why they're going through that transformation. Once that clarity is done, then the technology leaders, the technology aspects, the elements of the technology could come into play in terms of connect, collect, compute, and create, and the service that they want to offer. Many have made that transformation. Many are in the process of the transformation, and many have also failed in the transformation. And we see that entire gamut of companies that are going through those transformations.
So if a company fails in it, do they try again?
They try sometimes. They try because sometimes it's a miss of strategy. Sometimes it's a miss of vision. Sometimes it's a miss of betting on the wrong technology. But more often than not, what I've seen is when I see companies that have not succeeded, it's because the clarity of why are they going through the digital transformation is not very clear. And B, that doesn't become the DNA of the company from top to bottom. And till that cultural transformation happens, it becomes very difficult to set a strategy in place. I want to be digitally connected. I want to have connected appliance A or connected device B. It becomes a far more difficult proposition for organizations to gain the speed. The second thing I've also seen is that analog and industrial companies have a certain life cycle and a certain pace of product development and product execution and product deployment. And this has served them well for the markets that they're serving in. When you're talking about connectivity, digitalization, the life cycle, the product refresh, the product evolution is now keeping up with the high-tech companies and the yearly refreshes of products and so on and so forth. There comes a clash in terms of how do we reconcile the technology evolution pace in the two different areas. And those are all the challenging questions that the senior leaders of industrial companies have to go through.
So it sounds like the biggest challenge on this technology is not the technology, but it's the people.
The people would be the starting point in terms of a cultural mindset, because if the culture doesn't transform, the vision of realizing the technology doesn't necessarily always happen. So it's a combination of people first, vision, and then the transformation of these execution of the strategy.
So is the technology essentially the easy part?
The technology is there are certain choices of technology that it's a finite number of technology choices that you have that you could go about identifying the technology. Identification of the technology is the easier part. Integration of the technology and to bring the magic together is the more difficult part of the execution of the technology.
So you get to, because of what you do, you get to see the future every day. What does it look like? Where is this going over time?
I do believe that the future in different industries is going to be connected. Whether it's enterprise, industrial, homes, there's connectivity. The rate of connectivity, the speed at which the connectivity is established is going to be a function of that organization's conviction, ability, and all the things we talked about. So at the end of the day, it's not magically going to happen one day that everything is going to be, the toaster doesn't talk to the microwave doesn't talk. I don't see that happening immediately as much as there are going to be individual use cases, individual monetization, individual consumer experience that's all going to be enhanced by offering connectivity, by getting the data from that connectivity, using that as a service from that connectivity.
What do you see any difference in market segments? Are any market segments ahead of others, industrial versus manufacturing versus retail versus whatever?
All these segments are fairly fragmented. And you can think of normal segments such as buildings are a great place for connectivity. Smart buildings and are evolving. Another place is smart appliances and energy management. Industrial applications are there, as well as now in growth spaces, retail, and then you can expand it to smart cities. But those are the first three segments I would look at that might start on this digital transformation early on.
So what keeps you awake at night, if anything?
The piece the piece of how do you bring this is not, it's a team sport. It's not for one company to do it. How do you create open systems? How do you create open standards? How do you communicate the transformation for some of these companies that have not experienced the digitalization and the digital transformation? How do you communicate the vision of what is possible, of what was possible inside the home to be possible in their enterprise? And how do you create open systems and open solutions? And how do you bring all these different pieces together and the partners together to create the scale that they want in the fragmented environment that is already existing today?
So if we're having this conversation a year from now, what will we be talking about?
I think one of the things we should be talking about is, what are the standards that are evolved? What are the partners that have gotten together to solve these hard problems? And what are the enterprises and organizations that have adopted this digitalization, and which are the ones that have made the transfer successfully, and how do they do it? And we should be comparing notes on what are the common themes among the companies that have done this.
So final thought, there are a lot of people listening and watching here. They don't know what to do. What advice would you give them to get started and to get going quickly?
I think the first thing is, depending on which player you are, if you are a solution provider, if you're an architecture company that's offering technology solutions, you have to ask yourself the fundamental question: what is my role in this connectivity? What is my role in the digital transformation? And how do I play a role in this digital transformation? The company that's going through this, you have to ask yourself basic questions. Do I have it in my DNA? How do I create this in my DNA of the company? And how much of conviction do I have as a senior most executive in the organization to go through this transformation? And how does the future look like when it comes to value and monetization? Those are the fundamental questions I'd be asking.
Great advice. Girish, thank you so much. That was very insightful.
Thanks, Chad. Always a pleasure chatting with you.